Here is what I wish somebody had told me when I was younger. Or if they did tell me all of this, here's what I wish I had done a better job of listening to. This is coming from somebody who has been around for half a century and who has been moderately successful in his career. Now, the first thing you should know before we go any farther is that most of the advice you get on this platform or anywhere is totally useless. This is for a few reasons. The first and most obvious is that the advice is often coming from people who are trying to sell you something. They've got a book or they've got online courses or whatever. I don't have anything like that. But the other problem is that a lot of times the advice is coming from somebody in a place where their life doesn't look anything like yours. Like pro athletes love to give advice, and a lot of it sounds really cool. They've got some great motivational sayings, but at the end of the day, you're listening to somebody who has had a superhuman talent from the time they were a toddler. Their life just doesn't look anything like yours. But the third problem is something that I think most of you probably are not aware of, which is that I found most successful people have no idea why they're successful. Beyond the obvious, like they work hard and they study hard and they are passionate about what they do. But this is why so many of the tips that come from like success gurus and investment bros are just weird. Like they insist that you've got to get up at 4 a.m. and then take an ice bath to open up the blood flow to your brain or something. Or they've got like a really weird diet where they eat nothing but raw fish 13 times a day. The reason their tips are weird is because they're just superstitions. It's no different from how like every baseball player is incredibly superstitious. They think that if they are not wearing their lucky socks, they won't get any hits that day. It's the same thing. Because at the end of the day, these people don't really know why all of their peers who are using the same practice habits and same study habits are not succeeding the way they are. So they need to attribute it to something, but in reality, they just don't know. Because, and I cannot emphasize this enough, they've only ever lived the one life. They don't have the counterfactual of, well, what if I had tried different habits up to now? Is it possible I would be even richer? Maybe my stupid sleeping schedule has actually held me back. Nobody knows. So instead of offering you advice, I'm going to tell you the things that I wish somebody had told me, but that people didn't tell me because it kind of sounds bad to say. If you don't know what I mean, let's start. Number 1, not only is the world not fair, but it actually will never be fair, and you don't want it to be fair. Let me explain. This is the kind of thing that really rubs people the wrong way, especially if their politics are kind of left of center, because in their minds, everything about life and society should be about making the world more fair. And they would say, when you hear somebody say, life isn't fair, kid, you're usually just listening to a terrible person trying to justify their actions. Or someone who has been incredibly fortunate and had tons of advantages in their life who does not want to acknowledge that that obligates them to try to help other people. But when I say life is not fair and cannot be made totally fair, and that in fact you don't want it to be, let me give you an example. Incels, the guys who have become extremely angry because they can't get dates and they formed like a whole hate group around it. Their position is that it is not fair that a few attractive guys at the top get all of the pretty girls, that there should be redistribution of the pretty girls to everyone, because they say it is unfair that they were born into a body that society doesn't find attractive, that they were born short or with bad hair or unpleasant facial features. That it's not their fault that they have a weird sounding voice or an annoying laugh, or that they were born into circumstances where they weren't able to become financially successful by the time they were dating. That a lot of those guys that are getting all of the girls, they're not doing anything to earn that. They were born into bodies and circumstances that gave them an advantage, and that isn't fair, and that somebody should correct that unfairness. And I think anyone, regardless of their politics, would say, okay, it may be true that this isn't fair, but it's not the kind of thing that society can rectify, because if you want the government to come in and force these women to date you, which, by the way, there's an entire subculture that wants precisely that. They want to bring back arranged marriages. That in the name of correcting your unfairness, you've made life unfair for someone else. Because, after all, shouldn't the women have some say in the matter? In other words, your complaint about the world really just comes down to the fact that other people have free will and can make choices, and the choices they make just don't happen to favor you. When I use the incel example, everybody understands what I mean and everybody can see it. But here's the thing. Lots and lots of things in life actually work this way. The problem is there are two different kinds of unfairness, and people get them confused all the time. The first type is where the world would be fair, but humans have imposed an unfair system on it. So that in order to get fairness, you just have to get rid of that system. For example, if somebody came along and decided they were going to start charging people to breathe, and so they built some kind of a machine that sucked all of the oxygen out of the air and then started charging people for the oxygen. That is an artificial unfairness that has been imposed onto the system. If that system wasn't there, the air would just be everywhere for people to breathe. But the other kind of unfairness is the opposite of that. That's the situations where nature itself has made things unfair, and the only way to make it fair is by imposing some sort of rules or limitations. Dating and marriage is that second kind of unfairness, where if you let people pursue their own preferences, they know what they like, and you kind of can't force them to do anything else. And if you do, they're going to constantly be trying to find ways around your rule. To illustrate this, let's imagine there are two restaurants. And the first one is owned by a guy who is just incredibly passionate about food. I mean, this restaurant has been his dream his entire life. And he's incredibly careful about how he sources the ingredients. He's conscientious about who he hires to work for him. He cares desperately about the customers and the customer experience. Every single sandwich he makes is a work of art. And yet, his restaurant sits empty because down the block is a burger joint that is packed all hours of the day. That place is owned by a guy who does not care about food at all. He doesn't care about customers. He serves greasy cheeseburgers and fries and onion rings. He has a menu that was selected purely because he has observed this is what people buy. The owner of that first restaurant could say, correctly, you could argue, that it is unfair. That somebody who cares desperately about his craft is losing out to someone who is just in it for the money. To rationalize it, he's going to try to convince himself that it is the first kind of unfairness. That in a perfect world, his restaurant would be the one that's full, but there must be some sort of artificial rule being imposed by capitalism that is subverting him. That the customers have been brainwashed into thinking this other kind of food is better. And that if somehow that limitation could be lifted from him, then everything would be equal. When in reality, it's that second kind of unfairness. People simply, using their own free will as sentient adults, prefer the burgers and fries and onion rings. This, then, is what I wish somebody had told me long ago, that you have limited ability to fight against other people's preferences. If you want an example from my own life, okay, I write novels for a living. Pretty soon, AI is going to be writing most of the novels. If the readers prefer the books written by the robots, there's no one else who's going to come in and rescue me from that. The government is not going to come along and ban the robots from writing the books. That is not going to happen if the people want robot-written books. You can't fight against that preference. You can only adapt to it. And here, if you're getting discouraged because my first advice right off the top is life isn't fair and you have limited ability to make it fair, please stop and think about what you would say to the incel when he says, well, now what am I supposed to do if the government is not going to issue me a girlfriend? You wouldn't be confused as to what to say to that guy. You would say, look, even though you were born short or with bad hair or a weird voice, There are other guys out there just as short as you with even worse hair who have girlfriends. You still have lots of levers in your life you can pull to affect your chances. There are actions you can take. You have free will. You have things you can do that will still improve your chances. You will not elevate yourself to the same level as Brad Pitt or whatever. In other words, you will never have a completely equal playing field because this universe doesn't work like that. But you can give yourself a better playing field. Okay, well, some version of that advice you're giving to the incel, I would give to everyone in the world, regardless of their situation. Because if your frustration with your life or your failures are based on other people making choices that don't favor you, no one is going to come save you from that. The second thing that I wish somebody had told me long ago is much less discouraging than that first one, which is you would be shocked at how far you can get just by showing up. This was the most surprising thing I found when I went to college, is how many people just don't show up for things. Like if you've got a group project and you all agree that the four of us are going to meet on Thursday night at 7. On Thursday night at 7 o'clock, 2 of the 4 people will be there. And maybe one of them will show up an hour late, the other won't show up at all, and none of them will show up having done the preparation. If you just do what you say you're going to do, if somebody asks you to do a thing, if you just actually do it and put out a moderate amount of effort, you immediately will be in the top half of all human beings. There are so many people out there who, for whatever reason, are not organized enough to meet a deadline. Or if they borrow something from you and you tell them, okay, you can have this, but I need it this weekend. I need it back Friday night at the absolute latest. They will not bring it back. If you can just be organized enough to do the things you agreed to do for people, whether you have a calendar app on your phone to keep track of all of your obligations, or if you do what I do, which is just set a million alarms to constantly remind myself, you will be so far ahead of the game in every area of life, not just in work, but in friendships and in relationships. So much of it is just being there for somebody to do the thing that would make their life easier. That's what's so crazy about so much of the advice coming from guys who are at like the pinnacle of their field and they're trying to teach you how to retire at 30 as a billionaire. Most of you don't need to hear that. What you need to hear is show up, even when you don't feel like showing up, even when you're not in the mood, even when you don't have any energy, even when you're kind of sick, even when you think the task is going to be incredibly unpleasant, you still show up. You're there every time. If you can do that, you don't need a remarkable talent because that ability itself is rare. People who will show up no matter what, they're hard to find. The third thing that I wish somebody had told me when I was younger is something that seems incredibly obvious, but I see almost everyone get it wrong, which is that a lot of success is just time. For example, you will drive by somebody who's got a huge, beautiful house and you'll say, hey, what does that guy do? And they'll say, oh, he's a dentist. And you'll say, wow, do dentists make that much money? But they phrased it wrong. That guy has been a dentist for 35 years. He accumulated that. Again, sounds incredibly obvious, but every time you see somebody give advice, they tend to leave this part out. If you see some guy who's in great shape and you say, wow, what's your routine? And I'll say, well, I get up at 5 and I drink protein powder and then I go for a run and then I work out and then I do all of that again in the afternoon. The part that they need to then say is, I did that for 15 consecutive years, because that's how long it took, not just for me to see these results, but for me to imprint those habits into my life so that now I can't not do those things. I get stressed out if I don't have my morning workout. If you want an example from my own life, young writers constantly ask me, how did you get started as a novelist? And I think they always kind of hate my answer, which is that I wrote unpaid for most of a decade before it finally paid off with a book deal. I was just giving my work away for free. It's just that's how long it took me to build up a fan base and to get the word out. If you're asking me how you can do it faster than that, I don't know. I've only ever lived the one life. I only ever did it the one way. My secret was just time and that last thing, which is the consistency. The fact that I just kept banging my head against the wall for year after year, posting work every week without fail, whether I liked it or not. I feel like a big reason why people struggle to internalize this is because of pop culture, because so many of our stories are about people just getting great at something over the course of one training montage. Like even in stories where Luke Skywalker or Harry Potter or whoever were born with some sort of an amazing magical talent, they would be in a world where there are other people born with equal magical talents, with the difference being they spent 30 straight years honing that talent. Except for in very rare, extraordinary circumstances, there's kind of no way to cut in line ahead of those other people. It just takes time. The fourth thing that I wish somebody had told me years ago, though I absolutely get why they didn't, is that some of your biggest advantages in life are negative personality traits. For example, I do not make friends very well. I have no social life. A lot of the reason I can turn out the amount of work that I do is because I'm not out socializing. If I had been better at making friends, I would not have created as much work as I have created. Lots of the great people of the past only were able to do the things they did because they had no friends. I am not telling you to give up your friends to pursue your dreams. I'm saying that, for example, lots of the most beautiful pieces of art you've ever seen in your life were created due to negative personality traits, where the artist was not trying to bring beauty into the world. They were simply showing off. They were just vain. They wanted you to think they were awesome. That was their entire motivation, was for them to make you think they are better than someone else. Or spite. Spite is one of history's great motivators. This is why people like Michael Jordan, when you hear him talk about what motivated him to be great on the basketball court, makes him sound like a psychopath. It is entirely negative emotions. It is entirely spite. It is entirely him perceiving that other people didn't respect him enough. For some of you, this will be the central struggle of your life. The fact that you will have success, but your success is driven by negative personality traits that are kind of ruining your life. Almost every personality trait that we think of as a negative, from greed to narcissism to impatience to having a short temper, all of those things can help you succeed in certain fields. Many of the worst people you have ever known, the reason they have not addressed their negative personality traits is because they either think or they know that it will hurt their careers. I'm sorry, I know that some of you are going to disagree with me. I personally think it is objectively true that if you went and you found a young Michael Jordan and you gave him perfect inner peace, that he does not win 6 NBA championships. If you achieve success in life, I'm telling you right now, this is going to be the big challenge, because as you get older, you're going to want to try to fix some of the things that are wrong with you. You're going to want to try to find that inner peace that everybody agrees is necessary to live a normal and happy life. And you're going to be constantly asking yourself, okay, but am I going to lose my edge? Because if I lose my edge, I've got all of these people I'm competing with who are not worried about inner peace. They're only worried about winning. The fifth and final thing that I wish somebody had told me years ago: you don't know what you want until you get it. For example, some of you have had a career in mind from the time you were small children. You decided at age 5 you wanted to be a doctor. No matter how much research you do, no matter how many friends you make in that field before you enter it, you don't know what it's like to be a doctor until you work that job for a while. This is very bad news for most of you, because there's no way to become a doctor without several years of training. I'm sorry, there's no shortcut around this. You just have to keep trying things. This is why I made a video before about having to start over in life. This is why many of you will have to start over. And not just in your career. Lots of you, before you started dating, had in mind what an ideal mate would look like for you. Until you meet that type of person and spend time with them, you don't actually know what it's like. You are just operating off of a hypothetical, off of a fantasy that is almost certainly going to be wrong. This is why you really cannot compare your life to anyone else's or your timeline to anybody else's. If you find yourself in your mid-30s having to start over from scratch, and then you notice people you graduated high school with are now doctors, you can't be discouraged by that. All that happened was they stumbled across the thing they knew they wanted to do. Our system does not really have a good method for getting the right person into the right job. We all kind of just stumble around blindly until we land on it. And hey, get this. Even if as a child you decide you want to do something and then you get that job and you like it and it's exactly what you thought it was going to be, that job is going to change. Think about the field I'm in. I went into journalism in an era when I thought I was going to have to pick between working for a newspaper or working for the radio. The internet did not exist when I was a teenager. But please, please, for the love of God, and if you remember nothing else from this video, remember this. That process of restarting, of stumbling around, trying to find your career, don't ever feel like when you're doing that you are waiting for your life to start or that you have delayed the beginning of your life. Don't ever think of it as wasted time. None of it is wasted time. This is your life. Learning or working towards some goal, that is life. That's when life happens. That's when a lot of your best memories are going to be formed. A lot of the coolest things you're going to do are going to be the things you did on the way to the thing you thought you wanted to do. There is no wasted time as long as you are doing things. You're constantly learning skills, even if the thing you learned was, well, I definitely shouldn't do that again. And just as a final note, if you need more specific advice about your particular situation, the best thing you can do is just try to find people out there who have done the thing you're trying to do. People who have been successful at it, and just carefully observe their habits. I mean, you can try asking them for advice, but remember what we said earlier. They may not be able to articulate why their method works. They may not even be aware of it. Pay close attention not just to what they do, but what it's costing them. If you look at somebody else and say, I wish I had their life, make sure you're looking at the whole picture, because again, it can seem like that from the outside. But when you talk to that person, you may find that they're full of regret. But regardless of whether or not you actually achieve the goal you set out to achieve, if you spend your whole life pursuing greatness, then you have achieved greatness. Because I think at the end of your life, when you look back, you're going to find that it was the pursuit that mattered. One day, a woman you've never met before offers you $100,000 cash to drive her across the country. Half now, half when you arrive, 2,600 miles. But there's a catch. She has with her a large locked black box, big enough that you could crawl inside of it. She says you're not allowed to look inside the box, and in fact, you're not even allowed to ask any questions about the box. She says you have to leave behind any devices that can be tracked. No phone, no laptop, no credit cards, no GPS navigation. You'll be paying with cash and navigating with a paper map the whole way. And finally, she says you cannot tell anyone where you're going, and no, you cannot have time to think about it. We leave now. You hesitate. She doubles the offer. Would you do it? Maybe, if you're brave enough or desperate enough. And besides, you think, what's the worst that can happen?